This beggar was crying for a shocking reason. What a millionaire did next was drastic. He shaves the girl's head, and when it's revealed why he did it, everyone cries. Subscribe to my channel and comment to support my work. The sun was setting over Fifth Avenue, its last rays reflecting in the mirrored windows of the skyscrapers. Anthony Sullivan adjusted his expensive tie as he walked briskly along the crowded sidewalk, his tense face reflecting the frustration of the meeting he had just left. At 47, he had built an empire, but at that moment, he felt only the weight of failure. The project he had invested millions in was about to crumble. Passers-by instinctively avoided his imposing figure, as if they could sense the aura of power and coldness that surrounded him. His impeccable Italian suit and gold watch on his wrist contrasted sharply with the ordinary people who hurried past, heading home after another day of work. It was then that an almost imperceptible sound cut through his consciousness. A muffled sob coming from somewhere near his feet. Anthony tried to ignore it, as he always did with the panhandlers on the streets, but something about that particular cry made him hesitate. He looked down and saw, huddled against the wall of an office building, a girl who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. Her long, dark hair was tangled and dirty, partially covering her tear-stained face. She was wearing a faded t-shirt too big for her slender body and ripped jeans at the knees. Her bare feet were covered in street grime. Anthony felt a discomfort in his chest, something he hadn't experienced in a long time. He tried to take another step, to continue on his way as he always did, but his feet seemed rooted to the ground. The girl looked up, revealing huge, frightened brown eyes. It was at that moment that she stretched out her small, dirty hand, grabbing the hem of his Italian coat. Anthony's first instinct was to recoil, horrified at the thought of those filthy hands touching the fine fabric. But then the child spoke, her voice so low that he had to lean in to hear, "Please, mister, I'm hungry." Something in the simplicity of those words hit him like a punch in the stomach. Anthony looked around, expecting to see some adult responsible for the child, but only found the typical indifference of busy New Yorkers. "Where's your mother?" he asked, his voice more harsh than he intended. The girl looked down, clutching the coat even tighter between her dirty fingers. She disappeared a long time ago. "And your father?" A tremor ran through the child's small body. "He left, said he wasn't coming back." Anthony felt his throat tighten. Thousands of children lived on the streets of New York City. He always saw them, always passed them without a second glance. Why was this one different? "What's your name?" he asked, surprising himself. "Eleanor," she replied, still not letting go of his coat. "How long have you been here, Eleanor?" The girl shrugged, a sadly adult gesture for someone so small. "I don't know. Many days, many nights." Anthony looked again at the buildings around him, at the people passing by, at the sky that was darkening rapidly. The temperature was starting to drop, typical of New York nights. He thought of his empty house, the commitments he had, the dozens of reasons why he should simply continue on his way. It was then that he noticed something moving in the girl's hair. He moved a little closer and realized, with a mixture of horror and pity, that her scalp was infested with lice. She kept scratching her head, and now he could see the wounds caused by her dirty fingernails. "When was the last time you ate, Eleanor?" She thought for a moment, frowning. "Yesterday, I think. A lady gave me some bread." Anthony closed his eyes for a moment, fighting against himself. His whole life was based on rational, calculated decisions. There was no room for impulses, for emotions. That was how he had gotten where he was. But when he opened his eyes and again met that frightened and at the same time hopeful look, something inside him broke. "Come with me," he said, extending his hand without thinking about the consequences. "I'll buy you something to eat." Eleanor's face lit up for a brief moment before distrust took over her features again. She hesitated, still holding his coat, as if she feared he might disappear if she let go. "You don't have to be afraid," he said, his voice softer now. "There's a restaurant nearby. You can eat whatever you want." Slowly, like a frightened animal, Eleanor stood up. Her legs were trembling, and Anthony noticed several bruises and scratches on her skin. She still hadn't let go of his coat, using it as an anchor as she took her first hesitant steps. As they walked along the crowded sidewalk, Anthony felt the stares of the people, some of curiosity, others of disapproval. What a strange sight they must make, him in his impeccable suit, her looking like a little beggar. But for the first time in his life, he didn't care what others thought. The diner was just 2 blocks away. It was a simple establishment, the kind that serves daily specials and home-style meals. When they entered, the maitre d' looked at Eleanor with evident displeasure, but a stern look from Anthony was enough to silence any protest. They sat at a table in the back, away from the other customers. Eleanor seemed completely lost, her wide eyes scanning the room as if she had never been in a place like this before. Maybe she never had. "What do you want to eat?" Anthony asked, handing her the menu. Eleanor looked at the menu with confusion, and he realized that she probably couldn't read. His heart sank even further. "Do you have mashed potatoes?" she asked, timidly. "And gravy?" "Yes, we do. Would you like that?" She nodded quickly, as if she feared the offer might be withdrawn at any moment. Anthony placed the order with the waiter, adding a steak and salad. While they waited, he watched Eleanor squirm in her chair, scratching her head frantically. It was then that the reality of the situation began to hit him. What was he doing? He couldn't just feed the girl and then put her back on the street. But he couldn't take her home either. Could he? Before he could elaborate on that thought, the food arrived. Eleanor's eyes widened even further as she saw the full plate in front of her. She looked at Anthony as if asking permission. "You can eat," he said softly. She didn't need another incentive. She attacked the food with a veracity that broke his heart, using her hands instead of cutlery, as if she feared someone might take the plate away from her at any moment. Anthony watched in silence, his own meal forgotten in front of him. How long had it been since someone had shown any kind of kindness to this child? Where was her mother? What had happened that she ended up alone on the streets? And more importantly, what would he do now? As he watched Eleanor finish eating, Anthony tried to organize his thoughts. The girl had practically cleaned the plate, using pieces of bread to soak up every last trace of gravy. Now she was quiet, her eyes lowered, scratching, her head incessantly again. "Does it hurt?" he asked, indicating her scalp. Eleanor nodded slightly. "It itches a lot, all the time." Anthony took a deep breath. The lice were clearly a serious problem. He could see the wounds that her nails had left. He needed to do something about it. "I'm going to take you to a place where they can help with that," he said, getting up and paying the bill. The first salon they found was an elegant establishment with large glass windows and a modern interior. As soon as they entered, the employees exchanged horrified glances. The receptionist approached with a forced smile. "I'm sorry, sir, but we can't handle this kind of situation," she said, barely managing to hide the disgust in her voice. Anthony felt his blood boil. "I can pay any amount," he insisted. "It's not a matter of money, sir. It's a matter of hygiene. We could contaminate other clients." They left there and tried another salon, and another, and another. In each place, the same reaction: horror, rejection, polite but firm excuses. In one of them, an older hairdresser even whispered to Anthony, "The best thing would be to shave it all off. There's no other way with an infestation like that." Night had already fallen completely when Anthony finally stopped looking. Eleanor walked beside him in silence, increasingly downcast with each rejection. He could feel how much each look of disgust, each whispered word hurt her. It was then that he made a decision that would change his life forever. "I'm going to take you to my house," he said. "There we can solve this." Eleanor's eyes widened with fear. "You don't have to, mister. You've already helped me a lot. I can go back." "Go back where?" he interrupted more abruptly than he intended. Softening his voice, he continued, "It's getting cold. You can't spend another night on the street." She hesitated, clearly torn between the fear of the unknown and the despair of her situation. Finally, she nodded slightly. The drive to his house was silent. Anthony lived in a penthouse on the Upper East Side, one of the most affluent neighborhoods in New York City. When the car entered the building's garage, he could see the astonishment on Eleanor's face. The doorman cast a questioning glance at the girl, but a firm nod from Anthony was enough to silence any questions. In the elevator, Eleanor huddled in a corner, as if trying to make herself smaller. Anthony noticed that she was trembling slightly. When they entered the apartment, the lights turned on automatically, revealing an elegant and minimalist environment. Everything there screamed wealth and sophistication, and also loneliness. There were no photos on the walls, no personal objects in sight. It was more of a showroom than a home. "Come," he said, guiding Eleanor to the master suite. "Bathroom. Let's take care of your hair." The bathroom was huge, all marble and glass, with a bathtub that looked more like a small swimming pool. Eleanor looked at everything with a mixture of fascination and fear. Anthony took a pair of scissors and clippers he kept in a drawer. He had never used them. The barber came to his house to trim his hair. He turned on the shower and adjusted the temperature. "We need to wash your hair first," he explained. "Then we're going to have to cut it." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. "Cut it all?" He nodded gravely. "It's the only way. It's very infested. But it will grow back, I promise." Tears began to stream down the girl's dirty face. She hugged her own hair, as if wanting to protect it. "It's the only thing I have from my mom," she whispered. "She always said my hair was just like hers." Anthony's heart tightened. For the first time in years, he felt his own eyes sting. "I know it's hard," he said, kneeling down to be at her height. "But if we don't treat this, it can get worse. You can get really sick." Eleanor sobbed harder, but eventually nodded. Anthony helped her sit on a low stool and began to wash her hair. The water that ran out was dark with dirt. He applied shampoo several times, trying to be as gentle as possible. But even so, Eleanor whimpered when his fingers encountered the wounds on her scalp. When he finished washing, he picked up the scissors first. Eleanor's hair reached her waist. He started by cutting large strands, which fell to the floor like dead leaves. Every time the scissors closed, Eleanor sobbed harder. It was then that she took something out of her ripped pants pocket, a small teddy bear, so dirty and worn that it was hard to recognize its original shape. She hugged it against her chest as Anthony continued cutting. "My mum gave it to me," she explained between sobs. Before... She couldn't finish the sentence. Anthony felt a lump in his throat as he turned on the clippers. The buzzing sounded frighteningly loud in the silent bathroom. "Close your eyes," he asked softly. "It will be over soon." He passed the clippers carefully, removing what was left of her hair. Each pass revealed more wounds and bruises, not just from the lice, he realized, but also from previous abuse. What kind of person hurt a child like that? When he finished, Eleanor was completely bald. She seemed even smaller and more fragile now, clinging to the teddy bear as if her life depended on it. Her sobs had turned into a silent and devastating cry. "Done," he said, wiping away the last strands. "Now let's treat these wounds." He applied antiseptic ointment to each bruise, while Eleanor remained motionless, except for the tremors that ran through her small body. When he finished, he wrapped her head in a soft towel. "You need a bath too," he said, "and clean clothes." But Eleanor didn't answer. As soon as he finished taking care of her wounds, she got up and went to a corner of the bathroom, where she huddled with the teddy bear, her back against the wall as if she wanted to disappear. Anthony stood there, not knowing what to do. All his experience in business, all his power and money had not prepared him to deal with a traumatized child. "You're safe here," he said, his voice softer than it had ever been. "No one will hurt you." But Eleanor didn't move. She remained huddled, rocking slightly back and forth, clinging to the dirty teddy bear, silent tears streaming down her face. Anthony sighed deeply. What had he done? How could he help this child? And more importantly, how would he find her mother? He picked up the phone and started making calls. First to his housekeeper, asking her to come immediately, no matter the hour. Then to his lawyer, he needed to know how to proceed legally in this situation. While talking on the phone, he didn't take his eyes off Eleanor. She remained in the same place, in the same almost catatonic state. From time to time, her free hand went up to her now bald head, as if looking for the lost hair. It was then that he noticed something he hadn't seen before, a thin scar that ran down her neck, partially hidden by the dirty collar of her t-shirt. What other horrors had this child faced? What else would he discover about her past? The night would be long, he knew, and something told him that this was just the first of many to come. The housekeeper, Mrs. Davison, arrived shortly after midnight. She was a lady in her 60 years old, who had worked for Anthony for over a decade. When she saw Eleanor huddled in the corner of the bathroom, her eyes filled with tears. "Oh my goodness," she whispered, bringing her hands to her face. "Poor little thing." Anthony quickly explained the situation, or what little he knew of it. Mrs. Davison listened in silence, shaking her head. When he finished, she slowly approached Eleanor. "Hello, sweetheart," she said in a soft voice. "You must be cold there on the floor. How about a nice warm bath?" Eleanor looked up briefly, assessing the lady with distrust. Mrs. Davison continued, "Afterwards we can have something yummy to eat. Do you like hot chocolate?" A glimmer of interest passed through the girl's eyes, but she still didn't move. "Can I keep my bear?" she asked in a low voice. "Of course you can, honey. He needs a bath too, don't you think?" Slowly, very slowly, Eleanor got up. Mrs. Davison smiled gently. "I'll prepare the tub. Mr. Sullivan can wait outside." Anthony nodded, relieved to have someone who knew how to handle the situation better. He left the bathroom and went to his office, where his lawyer was waiting for him. "It's a delicate situation," said Dr. Miller, after hearing the whole story. "You can't just keep a child at home without any documentation or legal authorization. What do you suggest I do? Return her to the street?" "No, of course not, but we need to contact Child Protective Services, file a police report." "No," Anthony interrupted firmly. "No authorities for now. First, I want to find her mother." The lawyer sighed. "And how do you intend to do that?" "Hire private investigators, the best ones, whatever it takes." At that moment they heard soft footsteps coming from the hallway. Mrs. Davison appeared in the office doorway. "She's clean and fed," she informed. "I managed to convince her to wear a pajama set of mine that I brought in my bag. It's huge on her, of course, but it's better than those dirty clothes." "Where is she now?" "In the guest room, but—" Mrs. Davison hesitated. "She doesn't want to sleep. She's sitting on the bed, hugging that teddy bear. Now that it's clean, you can see that it's pink." Anthony got up. "I'll talk to her." He found Eleanor exactly as Mrs. Davison had described. The striped pajamas swallowed her small body. The sleeves folded several times so that her hands appeared. Her bald head shone under the soft light of the lamp, the wounds now covered with ointment. "Are you feeling better?" he asked, stopping at the door. She nodded slightly without looking at him. Her hands automatically caressed the teddy bear, which was now clean and a little less worn. "Do you want to tell me about your mother?" Eleanor was silent for so long that Anthony thought she wouldn't answer. But then, in a very low voice, she began. "She worked in a place far away. She left early in the morning and only came back at night. One day, she didn't come back." "When was that?" "I don't really know. A long time ago." She hugged the teddy bear tighter. "First, I thought she was lost. Then I thought she was sick. Daddy said she had abandoned us." "And your father? Where is he?" Eleanor's entire body trembled. "He would get angry, very angry. He drank that liquid that made him yell. Sometimes he hurt me." Anthony felt a wave of anger rise through his chest. Was he the one? "Who made that scar on your neck?" Eleanor instinctively took her hand to the spot. "He pushed me. There was a nail on the wall." Her voice was a haunted whisper. "There was a lot of blood. He got scared and took me to the hospital. After that, he disappeared too." "How long were you alone at home?" "A long time, until all the food ran out. Then I had to go out to look for more." Anthony closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control the anger he felt. How could someone abandon a child like that? "Your mother, what's her name?" "Iolanda," Eleanor replied. "She's pretty. She has long hair, just like—" Her voice failed and she began to cry again. Anthony approached slowly and sat on the edge of the bed. "We're going to find your mother, Eleanor. I promise." She looked up, a mixture of hope and disbelief in her eyes. "Really? Really, but now you need to sleep. Tomorrow will be a new day." Eleanor lay down reluctantly, still clinging to the teddy bear. Anthony covered her with the soft comforter. "What's his name?" he asked, indicating the bear. "Pinky," she replied. "Because of the color. Mom gave it to me on my 5th birthday." "That's a good name," he said, getting up. "Good night, Eleanor." "Mister," she called when he was already at the door. "Thank you." Anthony felt something strange in his chest, an emotion he couldn't name. He nodded briefly and left the room, leaving the door ajar. He found Mrs. Davison in the kitchen, preparing more hot chocolate. "I'm going to stay here tonight," she said. "The girl may need something." "Thank you, Mrs. Davison. Tomorrow morning, can you make a list of everything she's going to need? Clothes, shoes, things like that." "I'm already on it, sir." She hesitated for a moment. "Are you really going to look for her mother?" "I am. But there's something strange about this whole story. Why would a mother disappear like that without a word?" "Sometimes life takes us down paths we don't choose," Mrs. Davison philosophized. "But I agree that it's strange. That girl was very loved once. You can tell by the way she talks about her mother." Anthony spent the night awake, making calls and sending emails. He hired 3 different investigation agencies, all with express orders to find any information about a woman named Iolanda who had disappeared in recent months. Around 3 in the morning, he heard a scream coming from the guest room. He ran there and found Eleanor sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with terror, sobbing convulsively. "He's coming," she murmured. "He's going to hurt me again." Mrs. Davison arrived soon after and sat on the bed, pulling Eleanor into her arms. "Shh, it was just a nightmare, honey. No one's going to hurt you here. You're safe." Gradually, Eleanor calmed down in the lady's arms. Anthony watched from the door, feeling completely helpless. "Want some more hot chocolate?" Mrs. Davison offered. Eleanor nodded, still trembling. While the housekeeper went to the kitchen, Anthony remained in the room, not knowing exactly what to do or say. "He won't find me here, will he?" Eleanor asked in a low voice. "No," he replied firmly. "I'm not going to let anyone hurt you." It was a promise made in the heat of the moment, but as soon as the words left his mouth, Anthony knew that he would. do anything to keep it. Something had changed inside him, something deep and irreversible. The rest of the night passed slowly. Eleanor slept fitfully, waking up several times with nightmares. In the morning, she was exhausted with dark circles under her eyes. Anthony needed to go to the office. He had important meetings that he couldn't cancel. But before leaving, he called his security team and gave specific instructions. No one was allowed into the apartment without his express authorization. "I'll be back as early as I can," he promised Eleanor, who watched him with frightened eyes. "Mrs. Davison will stay with you, and later we're going to buy new clothes." She nodded, without saying anything, going back to hugging the teddy bear Pinky. In the elevator, Anthony checked his cell phone again. No news from the investigation agencies yet. Where was Iolanda? What had happened to her? And more importantly, why did he care so much? What had that little bald girl done to him in just one night? The day at the office seemed to drag on endlessly. Anthony couldn't concentrate on the meetings, his thoughts constantly returning to Eleanor. Every hour he called Mrs. Davison to find out how the girl was doing. "She barely touched her breakfast," the housekeeper reported on the first call. "She's sitting on the sofa, looking out the window." On the second call, "I managed to get her to eat some soup, but she hardly says anything." On the third, "She slept a little but woke up screaming again. I think she's having terrible nightmares." Around noon, his phone rang. It was one of the investigators. "Mr. Sullivan, we've found something interesting. In the last 6 months, there has only been one record of a woman named Iolanda being admitted to a hospital in East Harlem. She was treated in the emergency room after an accident, but the medical record is incomplete. It's as if she had disappeared from the system." Anthony felt a shiver run down his spine. "What kind of accident?" "It doesn't specify, but there's a curious detail. She was taken by a private ambulance, not by the public service." "Keep investigating. I want to know everything about that ambulance, the hospital, the doctors who treated her." When he finally managed to leave the office, it was past 5 in the afternoon. On the way home, he stopped at a shopping mall. He had never bought children's clothes before. The experience was surprisingly overwhelming. With the help of a patient saleswoman, he selected several pieces: dresses, pants, blouses, coats, pajamas, socks, shoes, all in the most cheerful colors he could find. He also bought a Sophia the First backpack after the saleswoman assured him that all the girls her age love it. He arrived home loaded with bags, finding Eleanor still in the same place where Mrs. Davison had described, sitting on the sofa looking out the window. She turned her head when she heard him arrive, her eyes immediately fixing on the colorful bags. "I brought some things for you," he said, placing the purchases on the floor of the living room. Eleanor slid off the sofa and approached hesitantly. Anthony began to take the clothes out of the bags, showing each piece. The girl's face was slowly transforming, first surprise, then disbelief, and finally a glimmer of joy when he showed her the backpack. Is all this for me?" she asked in a whisper. "All of it," he confirmed. "Want to try it on?" For the first time since he had found her, Anthony saw a genuine smile light up Eleanor's face. It was as if a mask had fallen, revealing the child she should be, not the frightened little beggar he had found on the street. Mrs. Davison helped Eleanor choose an outfit to wear, a blue dress with small embroidered flowers and white ballet flats. The girl twirled in front of the mirror, touching the soft fabric with reverence. "I look like a princess," she murmured. "You do," agreed Mrs. Davison with tears in her eyes. "Just one thing is missing." The housekeeper took a small plastic tiara with rhinestones out of her bag. "I bought it earlier today when I went to the grocery store." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears when Mrs. Davison placed the tiara on her bald head. For a moment, Anthony feared that she would start crying again, but then she smiled, a smile so radiant that it completely transformed her face. The moment was interrupted by the ringtone of Anthony's cell phone. It was the investigator again. "Mr. Sullivan, we've discovered more things. The ambulance belongs to a company called MediPrime. It's a small company with only 3 vehicles, but it has contracts with several private hospitals. And the company belongs to a man named Rick Mendez. He has connections with not very reputable people." Anthony felt his stomach sink. "Keep investigating. I want to know everything about this Rick Mendez." When he hung up, he found Eleanor watching him intently. "Was it about my mom?" she asked. He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "We're looking for her, remember? Some people are helping. Will you find her?" "I'll try, Eleanor. I promise I'll try." That night, after Eleanor finally fell asleep, wearing new pajamas with a unicorn print, Anthony met with his lawyer again. "The situation is more complicated than it seems," said Dr. Miller. "If this woman really disappeared under suspicious circumstances." "What are you suggesting?" "That maybe it's better to contact the authorities. The police have resources that private investigators don't have." Anthony shook his head. "Not yet. If we involve the police, Eleanor will probably be taken to a shelter. You didn't see how she was when I found her. And if we don't find the mother?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Anthony didn't want to think about that possibility. A shrill scream cut through the night, making both men jump from their chairs. Anthony ran to Eleanor's room, finding her sitting up in bed, trembling violently. "He was here," she sobbed. "Daddy was here. He wanted to take me." "It was just a dream," he said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You're safe here." "Don't let him find me," she begged, grabbing the sleeve of his shirt. "Please don't let him." "I won't. No one's going to hurt you here." Eleanor continued trembling but didn't let go of his shirt. After a few minutes, she asked in a low voice, "Can I sleep with Pinky in your room?" Anthony hesitated. He knew nothing about children, about how to deal with trauma, about what was appropriate or not. But the fear in her eyes was so real, so palpable. "You can," he replied finally. She picked up the teddy bear and followed Anthony to his room. It was a huge room with a king-size bed that seemed even bigger because it was always empty. Eleanor huddled in a corner, hugging Pinky. Anthony lay down on the other side, maintaining a respectful distance. They were silent for a long time, until Eleanor's breathing began to become more regular, indicating that she had fallen asleep. He stayed awake, watching that small figure huddled in his huge bed. How was it possible that in just 2 days his life had changed so much? 48 hours ago, his biggest concern was a $1 million project that was about to fail. Now, all he could think about was a frightened little girl and her missing mother. His phone vibrated silently. A message from the investigator. "Urgent. Rick Mendez has connections to an organ trafficking ring. The ambulance may have been used to kidnap people and take them to clandestine clinics." Anthony felt the blood run cold in his veins. What had happened to Iolanda? And how would he tell Eleanor if his suspicions were confirmed? The girl stirred in her sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. He watched her, feeling a wave of protection so strong that it almost suffocated him. No matter what he discovered, he wouldn't let her suffer more than she already had. But while sleep wouldn't come, a question echoed in his mind. How far was he willing to go to keep that promise? The day dawned gray, with a fine drizzle typical of New York City. Anthony woke up finding Eleanor, still fast asleep, clutching the teddy bear Pinky. During the night, she had moved closer, as if unconsciously seeking protection. He got up carefully so as not to wake her and went to the kitchen, where Mrs. Davison was already preparing breakfast. "How did she spend the night?" asked the housekeeper in a low voice. Better, I think. After she went to my room, she didn't have any more nightmares. Mrs. Davison nodded, a small smile on her lips. She feels safe with you. Anthony didn't answer. How could he explain the whirlwind of emotions he felt? The protective instinct, the fear of failing, the anger at what they had done to her. His cell phone vibrated. Another message from the investigator. We need to talk in person. It's delicate. He responded by scheduling a meeting for 2 hours from now at his office. When he returned to the room, he found Eleanor awake, sitting on the bed with wide eyes. I thought you had left, she said in a low voice. I'm not going anywhere, he replied, sitting on the edge of the bed. Want to have breakfast? Mrs. Davison made pancakes. Eleanor's face lit up slightly. In the kitchen, she ate 2 whole pancakes, considerable progress compared to the previous days. After breakfast, Mrs. Davison helped her dress in one of the new outfits, jeans, a pink blouse, and a lilac jacket. I need to go to work, said Anthony, but I'll be back soon. The panic returned to Eleanor's eyes. Won't it be long? No, I promise, and Mrs. Davison will stay with you. Maybe you can organize your new clothes. The girl nodded, still clearly anxious. Before leaving, Anthony saw her taking the Sophia I backpack, admiring the shiny details with reverence. At the office, the investigator was already waiting for him. He was a middle-aged man, with deep, dark circles under his eyes that suggested sleepless nights. What did you find? Anthony asked bluntly. We managed to track the ambulance that took Iolanda. She was admitted to Mount Sinai Hospital at 11:47 p.m. on March 15th. The medical record indicates severe head trauma after accident, but there's no record of what accident, no police report, no call to the rescue. It's as if she had simply appeared. Anthony felt a knot in his stomach. Continue. The ambulance belongs to Mediprime, as we already knew. But we discovered that this company is just a front. They have a scheme. They choose vulnerable people, usually women alone, without family nearby. They simulate accidents and take them to partner hospitals. For what? The investigator hesitated. The scheme is complex. Some patients simply disappear. Others are transferred to clandestine clinics. There are suspicions of organ trafficking, but nothing has been proven yet. Anthony closed his eyes, feeling a wave of nausea. And Iolanda? She was transferred from Mount Sinai 2 days after admission. The official destination was a hospital in Poughkeepsie, but she never got there. The ambulance that was transporting her simply disappeared along the way. No one knows, or no one wants to say, where it went. Anthony got up abruptly, walking to the window. The drizzle had turned into heavy rain, washing the office windows. I need to find her, he said, alive or... He couldn't finish the sentence. Mr. Sullivan, said the investigator cautiously, these people are dangerous. If we start asking too many questions, I don't care. Use all the resources necessary. Money is no object. When he returned home, he found a scene that surprised him. Eleanor was sitting on the living room rug with several drawings scattered around her. Mrs. Davison had provided paper and colored pencils, and the girl was drawing intently. What are you drawing? He asked, approaching. Eleanor raised one of the papers. It was a simple drawing made with childish strokes. 2 figures holding hands, one big and one small. It's you and me, she explained timidly. Anthony felt something tighten in his chest. He took the drawing carefully, as if it was something precious. Can I keep it? Eleanor's face lit up with a shy smile. She picked up another drawing. This one showed a woman with long hair. This is my mom, she said, her voice becoming sad. I drew her so I wouldn't forget what she looks like. Anthony sat down on the rug next to her. Tell me more about her. Eleanor hugged her knees, still holding the drawing. She always sang to me before I went to sleep, and she braided my hair every day before she went to work. Her hand rose unconsciously to her bald head. She worked in a big house, cleaning. It was far away. She had to take 2 buses. Do you remember where it was? She shook her head. I just know it was after the terminal. She left very early, still dark. And that day, the day she didn't come back? Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. She promised she'd bring chocolate. I waited at the window. Daddy got angry, said she had abandoned us. He started drinking that bad liquid. Her voice failed. Anthony waited patiently until she continued. He would get different when he drank. He yelled, broke, and things. Once, she shuddered, once he pushed me so hard that I hit my head. There was a lot of blood. Was that when he took you to the hospital? She nodded. After that, he disappeared too, said he was going to buy cigarettes and never came back. Anthony felt the anger grow in his chest. How could someone abandon a child like that? How long were you alone at home? I don't know. A long time. I ate what was in the cupboard. When it was all gone, I was very hungry. Then I had to go out to look for food in the trash. Each word was like a stab in Anthony's heart, imagining Eleanor, that sweet and fragile child, rummaging through trash to survive. You're not going to go hungry anymore, he said firmly. Never again. Eleanor looked at him with those big, sad eyes. Promise? I promise. She went back to drawing, now more animated. Anthony watched in silence, his mind working furiously. He needed to find Iolanda, or at least find out what had happened to her. Eleanor deserved to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. That night, after Eleanor fell asleep, again in his room, hugging the teddy bear Pinky, Anthony made more calls. He used all his contacts, promised favors, offered money. Someone, somewhere, had to know what had happened to that ambulance. He was almost giving up when his phone rang. It was an unknown number. Mr. Sullivan, said a female voice, clearly nervous. I work at Mount Sinai Hospital. I know what happened to Iolanda. Anthony felt his heart race. I'm listening. I can't say much. They monitor the calls. But she's alive. She's in a clinic in Queens. She's not doing well, but she's alive. The call dropped before he could ask any more questions. He tried to return it, but the number wouldn't go through. He looked at Eleanor, sleeping peacefully, and made a decision. No matter what he needed to do, he was going to bring Iolanda back to her daughter. The next morning, Anthony woke up with a light weight on his arm. During the night, Eleanor had moved even closer, using him as a pillow. Her face was serene in sleep, free of the shadows of fear that normally inhabited it. Carefully, so as not to wake her, he reached for his cell phone. There were dozens of messages from his investigators, all with the same frustrating information. No registered clinic in Queens matched the profile they were looking for. The movement made Eleanor stir. She opened her eyes slowly, looking confused for a moment. Good morning, he said softly. She smiled, a smile still shy, but genuine. Good morning. Did you sleep well? She nodded, hugging Pinky tighter. I didn't have a nightmare today. It was a small improvement, thought Anthony. Each smile, each night without nightmares, was a small victory. In the kitchen, Mrs. Davison was already preparing breakfast. The smell of freshly baked chocolate cake filled the air. I thought our princess would like something special today, said the housekeeper, winking at Eleanor. The girl sat down at the table, her eyes shining, as she saw the cake. She ate 2 whole slices, licking her fingers afterwards, a gesture so childish and natural that it made Anthony's heart tighten. For a few moments, she was just a normal child, without traumas or wounds. I need to go out today, he said, after breakfast, but I won't be long. The usual panic returned to Eleanor's eyes. Promise you'll come back? I promise, and I brought something for you. He took a small cell phone out of his pocket. "If you need to talk to me, just press this button. My number is already saved." Eleanor took the device with reverence, as if it were something magical. "I've never had a cell phone before." "Now you do, and you can call me whenever you want." She nodded, putting the phone in the pocket of the new dress that Mrs. Davison had helped her wear. A light blue model with small embroidered butterflies. Before leaving, Anthony watched her sitting on the living room rug, drawing. Her hair was beginning to grow, a very fine and light down, covering the previously exposed scalp. The wounds were almost healed. In the car, he called his main investigator. "I want all the clinics in Queens mapped, regular and irregular, especially the irregular ones. Mr. Sullivan, this could be dangerous. These clandestine clinics usually have protection from—" "I don't care. Find them." He spent the morning in his office, trying to concentrate on reports and meetings, but his mind always returned to Eleanor. The phone rang several times. It was her, just saying hi or telling him about a new drawing she had made. Around noon, he received a different message. "Mr. Sullivan, we found something. An abandoned clinic on the outskirts of Queens. Local residents report strange movement of ambulances at night." His heart raced. Could this be where they were keeping Iolanda? "Continue investigating?" asked his contact. "No, I'll take it from here." He was about to leave when his phone rang again. It was Eleanor. "Anthony?" Her voice was trembling. "There's a strange man looking in the window." He felt his blood run cold. "What man? What does he look like?" "I don't know. He's far away, but he's looking at me." "Where's Mrs. Davison?" "In the kitchen." "Go to her now. Don't get near the window. I'm coming home." Throughout the journey, his heart beat erratically. He was sure he was being followed, probably since he started investigating Iolanda's disappearance. When he got home, he found Eleanor huddled in Mrs. Davison's lap, trembling. "He was there for a long time," said the housekeeper, pointing to the window. "He only left when I threatened to call the police." Anthony went to the window. Across the street, a black car was parked. Inside it, a man was staring at him intently. When their eyes met, the man started the car and sped away. "I don't want her near the windows," Anthony told Mrs. Davison, "and I'm going to reinforce the building's security." That night, Eleanor refused to sleep in her own room. Even in Anthony's room, every noise made her jump. "It was him," she whispered, when the lights were turned off. "It was my dad." Anthony felt a chill. "Are you sure?" "No, I didn't see him clearly, but I felt it. The same way I felt when he was angry." He pulled Eleanor closer, letting her snuggle against his chest. "No, one's going to hurt you here, I promise." But while she finally fell asleep, Anthony remained awake, his mind working furiously. The man in the car couldn't be Eleanor's father. He was too young. He was probably someone linked to the clinic, someone who wanted to send a message. Well, he had a message to send too. The next morning, after making sure Eleanor was safe with Mrs. Davison, he drove to Queens. The abandoned clinic was on a narrow, poorly maintained street. The three-story building had broken windows and graffiti-covered walls, but something caught his attention. The locks were new. He parked a safe distance away and watched. In 2 hours, he saw 3 different people enter the building, all wearing white coats. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Eleanor. "I made another drawing. It's you fighting a dragon." Something in his chest tightened. How had that little girl managed to get so deep into his heart in such a short time? He looked again at the clinic. Somewhere in there, possibly, was Iolanda, the mother that Eleanor loved and missed so much. But how to get in? How to be sure? The answer came unexpectedly. An ambulance stopped in front of the building, the same Mediprime ambulance that had transported Iolanda. Anthony took several photos with his cell phone. When the ambulance left, he followed it discreetly. It led him to a warehouse in the back of an abandoned gas station. He approached carefully and managed to hear part of a conversation, another one to transfer tonight. The boss won't like it. People are already asking questions about that woman. What woman? That Iolanda, Sullivan's kid, is snooping around. Anthony felt his heart race. So she really was there. He returned to his car and called his lawyer. "I need your help," he said as soon as he answered, "but it has to be discreet. No police, nothing official. What are you planning?" "I'm going to get Iolanda out of there tonight." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Anthony," said the lawyer finally, "this is crazy. These people are dangerous." "I don't care. I promised Eleanor I'd find her mother." "And if something goes wrong? Have you thought about Eleanor? What will become of her if something happens to you?" The question hit him like a punch in the stomach. He hadn't thought about it. In recent days, he had become the only person Eleanor trusted, her safe haven. If something happened to him... His phone rang again. Another message from Eleanor. "I miss you. Come back soon." He looked once more at the abandoned clinic. He needed to be smarter. He couldn't just invade the place. That could put not only his life at risk, but also Iolanda's. "You're right," he said to the lawyer. "I need to think this through." But as he drove back home, his mind was already beginning to formulate a different plan. It wouldn't be quick or easy, but it would be safer. He found Eleanor in the living room, surrounded by new drawings. When she saw him, she ran to hug him, another small improvement that made his heart melt. "Look what I did," she said, pulling him by the hand to the drawings. There were several scenes. He and her in the park, in the beach, in a castle. In all the drawings, they were smiling. And in a corner of each page, there was a figure with long hair watching the scene. "It's Mommy," Eleanor explained. "She's watching us from afar." Anthony felt tears forming in his eyes. "I'm going to bring her back to you," he promised, hugging Eleanor tightly. "I just need a little more time." The days that followed were a mixture of anxiety and small joys. Anthony divided his time between planning Iolanda's rescue and creating moments of normalcy for Eleanor. The girl blossomed little by little. Her smiles became more frequent, her nightmares rarer. One particularly sunny morning, Mrs. Davison suggested a walk in the building's park. Anthony hesitated initially. Since the incident with the mysterious man in the window, he was afraid to expose Eleanor. But seeing the glimmer of expectation in her eyes, he couldn't refuse. "Just for a little while," he agreed, "and we'll stay close to home." The park was almost empty at that hour. Eleanor, wearing a yellow dress and the tiara that Mrs. Davison had given her, ran to the swings. She stopped for a moment, insecure, as if she didn't know exactly what to do. "Want me to push you?" Anthony offered. She nodded timidly. When the swings started to rise, a wonderful sound filled the air. Eleanor was laughing. Not a contained giggle, but a genuine child's laughter. "Higher?" she asked, her eyes shining. Anthony obeyed, his own heart light for the first time in days. For a few magical moments, they were just a father and a daughter playing in the park. The moment was interrupted by the ring of his cell phone. It was his investigator. "Mr. Sullivan, we've got more information about the clinic. They're transferring patients tonight. Iolanda is on the list." Anthony felt his heart tighten. "Where are they taking her?" "We're not sure, but we intercepted communication about a hospital in Poughkeepsie. It seems they want to get rid of the evidence. They're getting nervous." "About your investigation?" "We can't let that happen." "Mr. Sullivan." The investigator hesitated. "There's one more thing. Her state of health, it's not good. From what we've been able to find out, she's been in a coma since the accident." The information hit Anthony like a punch in the stomach. How would he tell Eleanor this? Daddy. Im called the girl from the swing. She had started calling him that a few days ago, and every time she did, something in his chest warmed. Look how high I am. He forced a smile, putting the cell phone away. I'm seeing you, princess. You're almost flying. Later, after Eleanor fell asleep, this time in her own room, another small improvement, Anthony gathered his security team. I want all the entrances and exits of that clinic monitored, he instructed. We need to know exactly when they're going to make the transfer. And then, asked his head of security, and then we're going to intercept them, legally, of course. He added, seeing the man's worried expression, I have a plan. The plan was risky, but it could work. His lawyer had obtained a court order to investigate the clinic, not because of Iolanda specifically, but because of suspected tax irregularities. It was a small loophole, but enough to act. While finalizing the details, he heard a scream coming from Eleanor's room. He ran there, finding her sitting on the bed, trembling. I dreamed about her, said the girl between sobs. She was calling me, but I couldn't reach her. Anthony sat on the bed, pulling Eleanor onto his lap. She snuggled against his chest, still trembling. She's coming back, isn't she? She asked in a low voice. You promised. I'm going to bring her back, he confirmed. But Eleanor, I need to tell you something. She looked up, apprehensive. Your mother, she's sick. She's going to need special care when she gets back. What kind of sick? Anthony chose his words carefully. She's sleeping, like Sleeping Beauty. Remember the movie we watched? Eleanor nodded slowly. And will she wake up? We're going to do everything we can to help her wake up. I promise. The girl was silent for a long moment, processing the information. Can I stay with you until she wakes up? She asked finally. You can stay with me for as long as you want, he replied, feeling tears forming in his eyes. That night, Eleanor went back to sleeping in his room. While watching her restless sleep, Anthony received constant updates from his team. The ambulance has arrived, his security chief informed. They're preparing 4 patients for transfer. Are you sure Iolanda is among them? Positive. We were able to confirm with a nurse. Anthony looked at Eleanor once more. He couldn't fail, not just for her, but also for Iolanda, who had spent months trapped in that terrible place. In the early morning hours, his phone vibrated with a new message. They are moving the patients now. It was the moment they had planned. His team was strategically positioned along the route that the ambulance was supposed to follow. At the first stop at a light, court officers, properly paid to work at that hour, would approach the vehicle with the court order. The minutes that followed were the longest of his life. Each vibration of the cell phone made his heart jump. Finally, the message he was waiting for. We intercepted the ambulance. Order fulfilled. Iolanda is being taken to New York Presbyterian Hospital. Anthony released the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. He looked at Eleanor, who was sleeping peacefully, hugging the teddy bear Pinky. We did it, he whispered, kissing her forehead gently. We found your mother. But as he watched the sunrise through the window, he knew that the battle was just beginning. Finding Iolanda was just the first step. Now they needed to bring her back, wake her up from her deep sleep. And there was also the question that tormented him. What would happen when she woke up? What would the dynamic between them be like? In recent days, he had become attached to Eleanor in a way he had never imagined possible, the idea of losing her. His cell phone vibrated again. This time, it was the hospital. Mr. Sullivan, the patient is stable, but her condition is serious. You need to come as soon as possible to discuss treatment options. He looked at Eleanor again. How would he tell her? How would he take her to see her mother in that condition? The rising sun cast golden shadows through the room, illuminating the girl's serene face. Whatever the outcome, he was sure of one thing. He would do anything to protect her, to ensure that she never suffered as she had suffered before. But first, he needed to bring her mother back. New York Presbyterian Hospital was silent when Anthony arrived in the early hours of the morning. He had left Eleanor sleeping under the care of Mrs. Davison, promising to return soon. The girl had cried when she saw him leave, but he needed to check on Iolanda's condition before taking her for a visit. The responsible doctor, Dr. Evans, was waiting for him in the ICU. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind his thin-rimmed glasses. Her condition is delicate, he explained, leading Anthony through the aseptic corridor. The head trauma caused severe cerebral edema. In addition, we found signs of medical negligence during the period she was in the other clinic. But can she recover? The doctor hesitated. It's possible, but I can't guarantee it. The coma is deep, and the longer it goes on... They stopped in front of an isolated room. Through the glass, Anthony saw Iolanda for the first time. She was a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 35 years old. Her long, dark hair, so similar to what Eleanor had before, was spread over the white pillow. "Can I go in?" he asked. The doctor nodded, handing him a mask and a disposable cap. Anthony entered the room, silently approaching the bed. Iolanda's face was pale and immobile, but he could see the resemblance to Eleanor, the same delicate features, the same shape of the eyes. "We're going to bring your daughter back to you," he whispered, although he knew she couldn't hear him. "She missed you so much." Suddenly, one of the monitors started beeping. Dr. Evans quickly entered the room. "The intracranial pressure is rising," he explained, adjusting something in the IV. "This happens sometimes. We'll need to keep her under constant observation." Anthony left the room with a heavy heart. How would he explain all this to Eleanor? When he returned home, he found the girl sitting on the sofa, hugging the teddy bear, Pinky. Her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Did you see her?" she asked immediately. "How is she?" Anthony sat next to her, choosing his words carefully. "Yes, I saw her. She's sleeping like I told you. The doctors are taking care of her." "Can I see her too?" He hesitated. "You can, but I need to explain some things to you first." In the following minutes, he tried to describe in the simplest way possible what Eleanor would find at the hospital. The machines, the tubes, the sounds of the monitors. The girl listened attentively, her face a mask of concentration. "It's going to be different from what you remember," he concluded. "But it's important that you know that she's still your mother and that she's fighting to come back to you." Eleanor nodded solemnly. "Can I take a drawing to her?" "Of course you can." The girl ran to get her drawing supplies. She spent the next hour concentrated, creating a colorful image. Her, Anthony, and Iolanda, all holding hands, huge smiles on their faces. "So she knows everything is okay now," she explained, showing the drawing. Anthony felt his heart tighten. How could a child who had been through so much maintain so much hope? On the way to the hospital, Eleanor held the drawing in one hand and the hand of Anthony with the other. She was wearing her prettiest dress, the blue one with butterflies, and the tiara that Mrs. Davison had given her. "Do I look pretty?" she asked as they rode the elevator. "I want her to see me pretty." "You look beautiful," he confirmed, swallowing the lump in his throat. Before entering the room, Dr. Evans spoke briefly with Eleanor, explaining in a simple way what she would see. The girl listened to everything with the same serious expression as before. "You can talk to her," the doctor explained. "Even when they're sleeping, sometimes patients can hear." When they finally entered the room, Eleanor stopped at the door, her wide eyes fixed on the motionless figure in the bed. For a terrible moment, Anthony feared that she would panic. But then, slowly, Eleanor let go of his hand and walked to the bed. She stood on tiptoe to get a better look at her mother's face. "Hi, Mommy," she said softly. "I brought a drawing for you." Carefully, she placed the paper on the small table next to the bed. Then, even more carefully, she touched Iolanda's hand. "Your hand is warm," she commented, "like before." Anthony watched from the door, feeling the tears run down his face. Eleanor continued talking to her mother, telling about her days with him and Mrs. Davison, about her drawings, about the teddy bear Pinky. "And Anthony is very nice, Mom. He takes care of me just like you did. You don't have to hurry to wake up, okay?" "We'll wait." One of the monitors registered a small change. Nothing worrying, but enough to catch Dr. Evans's attention. "Interesting," he murmured. "It seems she's responding to Eleanor's voice." "Is that good?" asked Anthony. "It can be. Any reaction is a good sign." They visited Iolanda every day after that. Eleanor always brought a new drawing, always talked to her mother about her day. Doctors noted small but consistent changes in Iolanda's brain patterns during those visits. A week later, during a particularly emotional visit, something happened. Eleanor was telling about how her hair was starting to grow back when she felt a slight squeeze on her hand. "Mommy," she called, her eyes widening. "She squeezed my hand." Doctors rushed to check Iolanda's vital signs. In fact, there was a significant change in her brain activity. "Keep talking to her," Dr. Evans encouraged. "It's working." Eleanor spent the entire afternoon next to her mother, telling stories, singing the songs she remembered her singing. From time to time, she felt another slight squeeze on her hand. When they finally had to leave, Eleanor didn't want to let go of her mother's hand. "What if she wakes up and I'm not here?" "We'll come back tomorrow," Anthony promised, "very early." On the way home, Eleanor was unusually silent. "Is everything okay?" he asked, worried. "When she wakes up," she began hesitantly, "will I have to leave?" The question hit Anthony like a punch in the stomach. It was something he also feared, but hadn't allowed himself to think much about. "I don't know," he answered honestly. "We'll have to see what your mother thinks is best when she wakes up." Eleanor squeezed his hand. "I wanted to stay with both of you." That night, lying in his bed with Eleanor sleeping next to him, she'd started having nightmares again, Anthony thought about the future. In recent days, he had allowed himself to imagine a life with Eleanor, taking her to school, watching her grow up, being the father she deserved to have. But what about Iolanda? She had rights over her daughter, obviously, and from what Eleanor said, she had been a good mother until her disappearance. How would she react to finding out that her daughter had become attached to a stranger? His phone vibrated. It was Dr. Evans. "Mr. Sullivan, something happened. You need to come to the hospital immediately." Anthony felt his heart stop for a moment. Nighttime calls from hospitals rarely brought good news. "What happened?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly. "It's better if you see it in person," replied the doctor, "but don't worry, it's nothing bad." He looked at Eleanor sleeping peacefully. He couldn't leave her alone, but he also didn't want to wake her up in the middle of the night. "Mrs. Davison?" He called softly for the housekeeper, who was sleeping in the next room. The lady appeared in a few minutes, already dressed. "Did something happen? I need to go to the hospital. Can you stay with her?" Of course. Go there. I'll take care of our princess." The journey to the hospital seemed to last an eternity. When he finally arrived, he found Dr. Evans waiting at the entrance to the ICU. "Her vital signs started to change about an hour ago," explained the doctor as they walked. "Brain activity has increased significantly." They stopped in front of Iolanda's room. Through the glass, Anthony could see that she was different. Her skin had more color, and there was a slight twitch in her facial muscles. "She's waking up." "Slowly," confirmed the doctor. "It's a slow process, but the signs are very positive. Eleanor's last visit seemed to have been the trigger we needed." Anthony entered the room, approaching the bed. Iolanda's eyes moved under her closed eyelids, and her fingers had small spasms. "Keep fighting," he whispered. "Your daughter needs you." He spent the rest of the morning there, watching every small change. Around 5 in the morning it happened. Iolanda opened her eyes. It was only for a few seconds, and she seemed confused and disoriented, but it was a start. Dr. Evans performed some quick tests. "She is responding to stimuli," he explained, "but it will take time until she is fully conscious." Anthony could hardly wait to tell Eleanor. He returned home as quickly as he could, finding her still sleeping. Mrs. Davison was preparing breakfast in the kitchen. "How is she?" asked the housekeeper anxiously. "She woke up," he replied, still barely believing it. "She opened her eyes." Mrs. Davison brought her hands to her face, tears welling up in her eyes. "Thank God! Our little princess will have her. Mother back!" When Eleanor finally woke up, Anthony was sitting on the edge of her bed. "Good morning, sleepyhead," he said softly. She smiled, still sleepy, and then noticed something in his expression. "Did something happen?" "Yes, it happened. Your mother. She opened her eyes this morning." Eleanor's face lit up like a rising sun. "Really? She woke up. Can I see her?" "You can, but you need to understand something. She's still very weak. She won't be able to talk much, and maybe she won't even recognize you right at first." Eleanor nodded solemnly. "It's okay. I just want to see her." At the hospital, they found Iolanda more awake than before. Her eyes, identical to Eleanor's, wandered around the room without a defined focus. "Mommy?" Eleanor called softly, approaching the bed. Iolanda's face turned towards the voice. For a moment there was no reaction, and Anthony feared that she wouldn't recognize her own daughter. But then, slowly, her eyes focused on Eleanor's face. A tear ran down Iolanda's face. "She's crying," whispered Eleanor. "Is she sad?" "No, princess," Anthony replied, his own voice choked. "I think she's happy to see you." The following days were of small progress. Iolanda began to recover her movements little by little, although she still couldn't speak due to the breathing. A tube, but her eyes followed Eleanor throughout the room, and sometimes her hand squeezed her daughter's lightly. A week after the first awakening, doctors removed the breathing tube. Iolanda's first word was whispered, almost inaudible: "Eleanor." The girl, who was drawing at a small table nearby, jumped from her chair. "Mommy! You spoke!" Iolanda tried to smile, although the movement seemed difficult. "My love." Eleanor climbed onto the bed carefully, lying down next to her mother. "I missed you so much." Anthony watched the scene from the door, his heart divided between joy and apprehension. It was beautiful to see mother and daughter reunited, but he couldn't avoid the fear of what would come next. In the days that followed, Iolanda grew stronger. She began to speak more, although still with difficulty. The doctors explained that she would need physical therapy and speech therapy, but the prospects were good. One afternoon, while Eleanor was in the cafeteria with Mrs. Davison, Iolanda called Anthony. "Thank you," she said, her voice still hoarse, "for taking care of her." He approached the bed. "You don't need to thank me. She changed. She's different, happier. She's been through a lot," he said cautiously, "but she's a strong child." Iolanda closed her eyes for a moment. "Her hair, we had to shave it. There were a lot of lice, but it's growing back again." A tear ran down Iolanda's face. "How long was I gone?" "Almost 6 months," she sobbed. "My baby, alone." "Do you want to tell me what happened?" he asked gently. Iolanda took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. "I worked, family's house, coming back late. Ambulance stopped. They said accident in front. When I got in..." Her voice failed. "You don't have to continue if you don't want to." "No, I need to tell. They gave me something. Injection. After Only darkness. Anthony felt the anger grow in his chest. We're going to report all of them. They will pay for what they did. Iolanda nodded slightly and then asked the question he feared most. What's going to happen now? Before he could answer, they heard Eleanor's cheerful voice in the hallway. She ran into the room, holding a lollipop. "Mommy, look what Mrs. Davison gave me. Want a little piece?" Iolanda's face lit up with a smile, the first real smile since she woke up. "Later, love," she replied softly. "Now tell me about your day." Eleanor climbed onto the bed, snuggling carefully next to her mother, and began to tell about her drawing new one, about the teddy bear Pinky, about how Anthony had taught her to make paper airplanes. Watching the two, Anthony realized that it didn't matter what happened next. The important thing was that Eleanor had her mother back. The rest they would solve with time. But as he prepared to leave the room and give the two privacy, Iolanda called him again. "Anthony?" He turned around. "Stay a little longer," she asked. "I want to hear your version too." And so, sitting in a chair next to the bed, with Eleanor between them, Anthony began to tell his part of the story. The meeting on the street, the impulsive decision to help, the small moments that had changed his life forever. At some point during the narrative, he felt Eleanor's hand hold his, while the girl's other hand held Iolanda's. It was as if she was trying, in her innocent way, to build a bridge between her two worlds. The days at the hospital began to develop their own routine. In the morning, Anthony took Eleanor to visit her mother, and the two spent hours together talking, drawing, recovering lost time. In the afternoon, while Iolanda was doing physical therapy, Eleanor stayed with Mrs. Davison at home. Iolanda's progress was remarkable. In 2 weeks, she was able to sit alone in bed and maintain longer conversations, although she still tired easily. Her memory of the period in captivity was fragmented, but little by little some memories returned. "I remember voices," she said one afternoon after Eleanor had left. "People talking about selling organs. But I couldn't move. I couldn't scream." Anthony held her hand gently. "You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to." "I need to," she insisted. "I need to understand. Why me? Why did they do that?" "They were bad people," he replied simply, "but they can't hurt you anymore." Iolanda closed her eyes, tears running down her face. "My daughter? What did they do to her after?" "Her father," Anthony began cautiously. "He abandoned her," Iolanda completed, her voice bitter. "He was always like that, violent. He drank a lot. I put up with it because of her, but..." Eleanor told me about the scar on her neck. Iolanda's face contorted with pain. "That's why I got that job far away. I was saving money, planning to run away with her. But then..." Her voice failed. Anthony waited patiently until she continued. "How did she survive, alone on the street? She's strong, like her mother." A small smile appeared on Iolanda's face. "She changed so much. She's more confident, more happy. It's because of you." "No," he disagreed. "It's because she has you back." Iolanda studied him for a moment. "You love her, don't you?" The question caught him by surprise. "It's in your eyes, the way you look at her, like a father." Anthony felt a lump in his throat. "I don't want to take your place." "You're not taking it," she said softly. "You're creating your own." Before they could continue the conversation, Eleanor came running back into the room carrying a new drawing. "Look, Mommy, I made our family." On the paper, 3 figures holding hands. Iolanda with her long hair, Eleanor with a princess dress, and Anthony in his suit, all smiling, all together. Iolanda looked at the drawing for a long time, then at her daughter, and finally at Anthony. It's a beautiful family, she said softly. That night, after Eleanor fell asleep, Anthony received a call from his lawyer. The police want to interrogate Iolanda, he informed, about the clandestine clinic. She's not strong enough yet. I know, but it's important. The more time passes, the harder it is to gather evidence. Anthony sighed. I'll talk to her tomorrow. But when he arrived at the hospital the next morning, he found Iolanda agitated. He was here, she said as soon as she saw him. Who? Eleanor's father. He passed by the corridor, looking through the rooms. A nurse saw him. Anthony felt his blood run cold. Are you sure? Absolutely. I'd never forget that face. Immediately, Anthony called his security team, reinforcing the protection around the hospital. He also instructed Mrs. Davison not to bring Eleanor that day. He won't get near you, he promised Iolanda. Never again. She squeezed his hand. I'm scared, not for me, for her. Nothing will happen to her, I promise. But that afternoon, while talking to the doctors about the possibility of discharge for Iolanda, his phone rang. It was Mrs. Davison in a panic. Mr. Sullivan, Eleanor, she disappeared. How did she disappear? We were in the building's park. I went to the bench to get something from the bag. When I came back, she was no longer there. Anthony felt his world collapse. Did you call security? Yes, they are reviewing the cameras now. But Mr. Sullivan, there's one more thing. What? A man. The security guards saw a strange man lurking around the building earlier. They thought it was just another panhandler. But now, Anthony hung up the phone and ran to Iolanda's room. We need your help, he said, trying to keep his voice calm. Where could he have taken her? Yolanda's face paled. Taken? No. We're going to find her, he promised. But I need you to concentrate. Where did he go when he drank? Did he have a specific place? Iolanda closed her eyes, forcing herself to think. There was a bar near home. Tony's place. He spent hours there. Where is it? East Harlem, Acacia Street. Anthony was already calling his team when Iolanda grabbed his arm. Take me with you. You haven't been discharged yet. It's my daughter, she interrupted, her voice stronger than it had ever been since she woke up. I'm not going to stay here while she's with him. Anthony looked at her for a moment, then nodded. I'll arrange an ambulance, but you stay inside it. Understand? You can't risk it. While the paramedics prepared Iolanda for transport, Anthony received constant updates from his security team. The building's cameras had recorded a man talking to Eleanor in the park. She seemed scared, but had followed him without resistance. She must have recognized him, said Iolanda, tears running down her face. She must be terrified. On the way to East Harlem, Anthony tried to remain calm, but his heart beat erratically. How had he not foreseen this? How had he let that monster get close to his girl? The bar was on a narrow, poorly lit street. It was closed at that hour, but there was light coming out of a crack in the back door. There, Yolanda pointed from the ambulance. He knows the owner. There's a secret entrance. Anthony signaled for his team to position themselves. He didn't want to involve the police. That could scare the man and put Eleanor in more danger. It was then that they heard Eleanor's voice, loud and frightened. No, Dad, please, no! The sound made Iolanda try to get up from the stretcher, but the paramedics held her down. My baby, she sobbed. Please, save her. Anthony had never felt so angry in his life. With a gesture, he ordered his team to break down the door. What they found inside made his blood boil. The bar was dark and dusty, with a strong smell of alcohol and mold. In the center of the room, Eleanor was huddled in a corner, hugging her knees. Her new dress was dirty and torn, and there were tear marks on her face. In front of her, a man staggered, holding an empty bottle. You're my daughter, he shouted, his voice slurred with drink. Mine, not that weak woman's, nor that stuck-up rich man's. Please, whispered Eleanor, trembling. I want to go home. Home? The man laughed bitterly. What home? That mansion full of frills? It's not your place. Your place is here with me. When the door was broken down, the man turned sharply, tripping over his own feet. His bloodshot eyes widened when he saw Anthony. So you came, he said with a crooked smile, the savior of the homeland, the man who thinks he can buy a family. Anthony took a step forward, controlling the anger that threatened to consume him. Let her go, now. Let go. The man staggered towards Eleanor, who huddled even more. She's my blood, my flesh. What are you? Nothing, just a rich man wanting to play daddy. Daddy, called Eleanor in a low voice, looking at Anthony. There was so much fear in her eyes, so much pleading. The other man, her biological father, turned violently upon hearing how she called Anthony. No! He roared. Don't call him that! I'm your father! He raised the bottle as if to strike Eleanor. The girl screamed, covering her head with her arms. It was enough. Before the man could complete the movement, Anthony crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. He grabbed the arm holding the bottle and twisted it, causing him to drop the improvised weapon. Never again, said Anthony, his voice trembling with contained fury. Come near her. The man tried to break free, but years of drinking had corroded his strength. 2 security guards easily immobilized him. Anthony ran to Eleanor, who was shaking violently. It's okay now, princess, he whispered, enfolding her in his arms. It's okay, I'm going to take you home. She clung to him as if her life depended on it, sobbing against his chest. I'm sorry, she murmured through tears. He said he would hurt Mommy if I didn't go with him. Shh, it wasn't your fault. You were very brave. Outside they heard Yolanda's voice. My daughter, where's my daughter? Mommy, cried Eleanor. Anthony carried her outside. Yolanda was sitting on the stretcher of the ambulance, fighting against the paramedics who were trying to keep her lying down. When she saw Eleanor, she stretched out her trembling arms. Anthony placed the girl gently next to her, and the two hugged each other, crying. My love, she whispered Yolanda, covering her daughter's face with kisses. Are you okay? Did he hurt you? Eleanor shook her head. I'm okay, Mom. I just want to go home. The paramedics insisted that they needed to take Yolanda back to the hospital. She was still not strong enough for all that excitement, but she refused to let go of Eleanor. Come with us, Anthony told the girl. We can all go to the hospital. On the way, Eleanor told what had happened, how her father had approached her in the park, saying that he would hurt Yolanda if she didn't go with him. How he had taken her to the bar, yelling about how she had abandoned him, how everyone abandoned him. He was different, she said in a low voice, more scary than before. Yolanda squeezed her hand. He won't get near you again. Never again. At the hospital, while the doctors examined Yolanda and Eleanor, Anthony made some calls. His lawyer would arrange a restraining order immediately. His security team would ensure that Eleanor's father couldn't approach any of them again. When he returned to the room, he found mother and daughter sleeping together in the hospital bed. Eleanor was snuggled against Yolanda, still holding her hand even in her sleep. He sat in the armchair next to the bed, watching them. How had his life changed so much in such a short time? A few weeks ago, he was a lonely man, focused only on business and money. Now, Yolanda opened her eyes slowly. Thank you, she whispered, for bringing her back. I'll always bring her back, he replied. I'll always protect you both. She studied him for a moment. You know, when I was in that clinic, trapped in the darkness, I prayed. Not for me, but for her. I asked God to send someone to take care of my girl. And he sent, Anthony completed. Yes, smiled Yolanda. In a way I never imagined. They were silent for a moment, just watching Eleanor sleep. Her face was serene, now free from the fear she had shown earlier. What happens now? He asked finally. What do you mean? When you're discharged, where are you going? Yolanda caressed Eleanor's short hair, which was beginning to grow again. I don't know, she admitted. Our old house, I can't go back there. There are too many bad memories. Stay with me, said Anthony, the words coming out before he could think. My apartment is too big for one person. And Eleanor, she already feels at home there. I can't accept... Please, he interrupted. It's not just for you. It's for... Me too, this girl. She changed my life, Yolanda. She made me see the world in a different way. She made me want to be a better person. Yolanda looked at her sleeping daughter, then back at Anthony. She calls you Dad, she said softly. No, I'm not. No, she interrupted. You are. Not by blood, but by choice, by love. That's worth much more. Eleanor stirred in her sleep, murmuring something incomprehensible. Yolanda hugged her tighter. We'll stay, she decided. At least for a while, until we see how things work out. Anthony felt his heart expand in his chest. As long as you need, as long as you want. Outside the hospital, the New York City night continued its normal course. Cars honking, people returning home after a long day at work. But inside that room, something new was being born. A different family, built not by blood ties, but by choices, by love, by destiny. And while watching Eleanor sleep, safe in her mother's arms, Anthony knew that his life would never be the same. Nor did he want it to be. In the pocket of his coat, his cell phone vibrated, a message from his lawyer informing him that the restraining order had been granted. Eleanor's biological father could not approach them, another battle won, but Anthony knew there was still much ahead. Yolanda would need time to recover completely. Eleanor would need help to overcome her traumas. And he would need to learn to be the father she deserved to have. But looking at the two sleeping peacefully, he knew that he would face any challenge, because now he had something to fight for, something much more precious than all the money he possessed. He had a family. A week after the incident at the bar, Yolanda was finally discharged from the hospital. Her recovery had been remarkable, although she still needed physical therapy and regular medical monitoring. Are you sure about this? She asked Anthony as he pushed her wheelchair through the hospital corridor. It was just a precaution. She could already walk short distances on her own. Absolutely, he replied. My apartment is too big for one person. Eleanor walked beside them, holding her mother's hand. Since the episode with her biological father, she was more attached than ever, rarely letting Yolanda or Anthony out of her sight. When they arrived at the apartment, Mrs. Davison awaited them with a special lunch. The housekeeper had outdone herself. The delicious smell of homemade lasagna filled the entire environment. Welcome to your new home, she said, hugging Yolanda. Warmly, Anthony had prepared the guest room for Yolanda, transforming it completely. New furniture, light curtains, a comfortable bed with soft sheets. On the bedside table, a picture frame with Eleanor's photo. It's beautiful, whispered Yolanda, touched. Come see my room, Mum, called Eleanor, pulling her by the hand. The girls' room had also been renovated. The walls were now a soft blue, decorated with colorful butterflies. A bookcase full of children's books occupied one of the walls, and there was a small desk where she could draw. Look, I put all my drawings on the wall, she showed proudly, and Anthony gave me all these books. Yolanda watched everything with tears in her eyes. It was so different from her old house, from the small, dark place where they had lived. In constant fear, during lunch, Eleanor spoke non-stop, telling her mother about all the things she had learned in recent weeks, how Anthony had taught her to make paper airplanes, how Mrs. Davison made the best hot chocolate in the world, how the building's doorman always kept candy for her. "And did you know that Anthony has a whole library in his office?" she said excitedly. "He said he's going to teach me to read." Iolanda looked at Anthony, who smiled shyly. "If you allow it, of course," he said. "Of course I allow it," she replied softly. "You've already done so much for her." After lunch, while Eleanor took her usual nap, Anthony and Iolanda talked on the terrace. "How are we going to do it?" she asked. "With everything?" "What do you mean?" "School for Eleanor, documents, all the legal stuff." "I'm already taking care of that," he replied. "My lawyer is arranging everything. As soon as you're stronger, we can enroll her in a good school nearby." Iolanda was silent for a moment, looking at the city that stretched out below them. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why are you doing all this for us?" Anthony thought for a moment before answering. "You know, before I met Eleanor, my life was empty. I had money, success, but I had no purpose. She changed all that. She made me see the world in a different way." "She has that power," smiled Iolanda, "to make people love her." "It's not just that," he continued. "Watching you two together, seeing the love between mother and daughter, makes me want to be a part of that, makes me want to be a better person." At that moment they heard a scream coming from Eleanor's room. They ran there, finding the girl sitting on the bed, trembling. "Nightmare again?" asked Iolanda softly, sitting next to her. Eleanor nodded, hugging the teddy bear Pinky. "He was there again, Dad." "He can't hurt you anymore," said Anthony from the door. "He'll never get near you again." "Promise?" "I promise." Eleanor looked at the two of them, her mother on one side, Anthony on the other, and something in her little face relaxed. "Tell me a story," she asked. Yolanda began to sing softly an old lullaby. Anthony had never heard her sing before. Her voice was sweet and clear, even still hoarse from the prolonged intubation. Gradually, Eleanor relaxed, her eyes heavy with sleep. But before falling asleep completely, she murmured, "I love you, Mommy, Daddy." Yolanda and Anthony exchanged a look over the sleeping girl's head. There was so much to be said, so much to be resolved, but at that moment, none of that mattered. The days turned into weeks. They established a comfortable routine. Anthony went to work in the morning, but always came back for lunch. Iolanda stayed at home, recovering her strength and helping Mrs. Davison with light tasks. Eleanor blossomed more each day. Her hair grew, forming small, dark curls that framed her face. Her smiles became more frequent, her laughter more free. The nightmares still happened occasionally, but they were increasingly rare. One night, after Eleanor had gone to sleep, Anthony found Iolanda on the terrace, looking at the stars. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, offering her a cup of tea. "About how strange life is," she replied. "How the worst things sometimes lead us to the best places." "How so?" "If I hadn't been kidnapped, if Eleanor hadn't been alone, we would never have met you." Anthony sat down next to her. "I wish none of that had happened, that you had never suffered so much." "Me too," she admitted. "But I can't help but be grateful for the result. Look at her now, happy, safe, loved. She has 2 people who would give their lives to protect her." 3, he corrected. "Mrs. Davison is also completely in love with her." Iolanda laughed, gently. "True. I never thought we'd have a family like this." The word lingered between them. Family. That's what they had become, in a totally unexpected way. "Iolanda," he began hesitantly, "I know it's early, that you're still adapting, but I wanted to ask you something." She looked at him curiously. "I want to adopt Eleanor, legally. With your permission, of course, not to take your place. I would never do that, but to ensure that she will always have a father, even if something happens to me." Tears shone in Iolanda's eyes. "She already considers you her father," she said softly. "The paper will only formalize what already exists in her heart. Is that a yes?" She smiled, taking his hand. "It's a yes." At that moment, they heard light footsteps behind them. Eleanor was standing in the doorway of the terrace, hugging the teddy bear Pinky. "I couldn't sleep," she said timidly. "Come here, princess," called Anthony. She ran to them, settling between the two. Iolanda wrapped her arm around her, while Anthony held her little hand. "Look how many stars," said Eleanor, pointing to the sky. "They're beautiful," agreed Iolanda. "Did you know that every star has a story?" asked Anthony. "Want to hear some?" Eleanor nodded enthusiastically. And there were the three, telling stories about the stars, laughing together, simply being a family. A different family, built through pain and love, from loss and encounter. But a true family, united not by blood, but by choice. And while watching Eleanor fall asleep in her mother's arms, Anthony knew that he had found his true purpose in life. Not in business or money, but in the love of a little girl who had chosen him as a father, and in the strong woman who had learned to trust him. The future still held challenges. There always would be. But they would face it together as a family. The months passed smoothly, like pages of a book being turned by the wind. Autumn arrived in New York City, painting the trees of the Upper East Side with shades of red and gold. In Anthony's penthouse, now transformed into a true home, life went on with a sweetness that none of them had imagined possible a few months before. Iolanda had fully recovered her movements, although she still needed regular physical therapy sessions. Her hair, once so similar to Eleanor's, had grown back, falling in soft waves to her shoulders. The fear in her eyes had been replaced by a quiet serenity. One particularly special morning, Anthony gathered the family in the living room. Eleanor, wearing her favorite dress, the blue one with butterflies and the inseparable tiara, sat between him and Iolanda on the sofa. "I have something important to tell you," he began, his heart beating a little faster. "Remember when we talked about adoption, princess?" Eleanor nodded enthusiastically. "You're going to be my real dad." "That's right. And today," he took an envelope out of his pocket. "Today the official papers arrived." Eleanor's eyes widened. "Is it ready already?" "Almost. There's only one very important thing missing." He knelt in front of her. "I need to know if you really want this, if you want me to be your father legally." "But you're already my dad," she said with the simplicity of children. "I know, princess, but this will make it official. Forever." Eleanor looked at Iolanda as if seeking approval. Her mother smiled, tears shining in her eyes. "It's your decision, my love," she said softly. The girl didn't hesitate. She jumped off the sofa and hugged Anthony tightly. I want so much." Anthony hugged her back, feeling his own face wet with tears. When they separated, Eleanor had a curious expression. "But what about Mommy?" "What do you mean, princess? If you're going to be my real dad, shouldn't you be her dad too?" The innocent question made the adults freeze. Iolanda blushed intensely, while Anthony seemed to have lost the ability to speak. "It doesn't quite work that way, sweetheart," began Iolanda, but Eleanor continued. "Why not? You already live together, and you like him, don't you, Mum? You smile differently when he's around." The silence that followed was loaded with something new, something that had grown silently between them in recent months. In glances exchanged, over the breakfast table, in nighttime conversations on the terrace, in small gestures of care and affection. "Eleanor," called Mrs. Davison from the kitchen with perfect timing, "come help me make brownies." The girl ran excitedly to the kitchen, leaving the adults in an awkward silence. "I'm sorry," said Iolanda finally. "Children say all sorts of things." "You don't need to apologize," replied Anthony softly. After a moment he added, "She's not entirely wrong, you know." Iolanda raised her eyes, surprised. "How so?" About you smiling differently. I've noticed it too." The blush on her cheeks intensified. "Anthony, you don't need to say anything," he interrupted gently. I just want you to know that it's not only for Eleanor that I thank every day for having you in my life." Before Iolanda could answer, they heard a cheerful cry coming from the kitchen. "Mom, Dad, come see the brownies I made." They exchanged a smile and went to the kitchen, where they found Eleanor covered in chocolate, proudly showing a tray of slightly crooked brownies. "They're perfect," declared Anthony, trying one. The rest of the day was filled with preparations for the small celebration they would have the next day, when they would officially sign the adoption papers. Eleanor insisted on helping to decorate the house, spreading balloons and colorful ribbons everywhere. At night, after she finally fell asleep, not without first making everyone promise that they would wake her up very early the next day, Anthony found Iolanda on the terrace in her usual place. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, sitting next to her. "About how funny life is," she replied. "A few months ago I was trapped in that clinic without hope. I thought I had lost everything, my freedom, my daughter, my life. And now, she smiled, looking at the lights of the city. Now I have more than I ever dreamed of having, a safe house, a happy daughter, a real family. And a man in love with you," Anthony completed softly. Iolanda turned to him, surprised. "What? You heard me?" He took her hand gently. "I didn't plan this. I didn't expect it, but it happened. I fell in love not only with Eleanor, but with you too. For your strength, your courage, your huge heart." Tears shone in her eyes. "Anthony, You don't need to say anything now," he said. "I just wanted you to know, to understand that when I say I want you in my life, I mean you too, not just as Eleanor's mother, but as yourself." Iolanda squeezed his hand, and when she spoke, her voice was choked with emotion. "Eleanor was right, you know. I really do smile differently when you're around." Anthony felt his heart race. Slowly, he took a step forward, his hands finding her face. "May I?" She nodded slightly, and when their lips met, it was as if all the pieces of a puzzle finally fell into place. The kiss was interrupted by a small cry of joy. They turned to find Eleanor standing in the doorway of the terrace, jumping with excitement. "I knew it! I knew it!" she celebrated. "Now we're going to be a real family." Iolanda and Anthony looked at each other, laughing. How to argue with such a simple and pure logic? "Come here, princess," called Anthony, stretching out his arms. Eleanor ran to them, and they stood there embraced, the three together, under the starry sky of New York City. A different family built through pain and love, from loss and encounter, but a true family, complete, finally happy. And while holding Eleanor between them, both knew that they had found something precious, not only each other but a home, a place where love grew stronger each day, where smiles were true and hugs healed all wounds. The future opened before them like a blank page, ready to be filled with new stories, new adventures, new smiles. And for the first time in a long time, they were all truly eager to see what tomorrow would bring. The morning of the official adoption day dawned bright, with a cloudless blue sky over New York City. Eleanor woke up before everyone else, running through the apartment in her unicorn pajamas, unable to contain her anxiety. "Today, today, today," she hummed, jumping on Anthony's bed. He opened his eyes, smiling at seeing his daughter's lively little face. Daughter, now he could call her that officially. "Good morning, princess," he said, pulling her into a hug. "Dad, what time are we going to sign the papers? Is it time yet? Can I put on my new dress?" The night before, Anthony had surprised Eleanor with a special gift, a white dress with small blue flowers embroidered on it, chosen especially for the occasion. It was the kind of dress that every girl dreams of having, the kind of gift he had never imagined giving to someone. Iolanda appeared in the doorway of the room, already dressed and with her hair done. "Easy, sweetheart," she said, laughing at her daughter's excitement. "We still have to have breakfast." In the kitchen, Mrs. Davison had prepared a real feast. Pancakes, fresh fruit, bagels, fresh orange juice. The table was decorated with flowers and colorful balloons. "Today is a day for celebration," declared the housekeeper, hugging Eleanor. "And I made your favorite cake for later, chocolate with strawberry." After breakfast, while Iolanda helped Eleanor get ready, Anthony received a call from his lawyer. "Everything is ready," informed Dr. Miller. "The papers are just waiting for the signatures. And I have another surprise. I got Eleanor's new birth certificate, now with your name as father." Anthony felt a lump in his throat. It was real. It was really happening. When Eleanor came out of the room, wearing the new dress, the princess tiara, and a radiant smile, he felt his heart melt. How was it possible to love someone so much in such a short time? "How do I look?" she asked, twirling. "Beautiful," he replied, fighting back tears. "The most beautiful princess in the world." On the way to the courthouse, Eleanor didn't stop, talking for a minute, too excited to contain her joy. She held Anthony's hand tightly, as if she feared that something could prevent them from getting there. The process itself was surprisingly simple and quick. Signatures, stamps, formal declarations. But when the official handed over the final documents, declaring Anthony officially Eleanor's father, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. "Is it forever now?" asked Eleanor, looking at the papers with fascination. "Forever," he confirmed, his voice choked. She jumped into his arms, and he held her tight, feeling her little heart beat against his. Iolanda hugged them too, and for a perfect moment, they were just the three, united by love and by law. Back at the apartment, they found a surprise. Mrs. Davison had transformed the living room into a small party hall, with more balloons, colorful ribbons, and a banner that read, "Welcome officially to the family, Eleanor." The chocolate cake was magnificent, decorated with fresh strawberries and small sugar butterflies. Eleanor clapped her hands with joy upon seeing it. "Make a wish before blowing out the candles," Mrs. Davison instructed. The girl closed her eyes tightly, thinking seriously. After a moment, she blew out the candles with determination. "What did you wish for?" asked Iolanda. "I can't tell, Mom, otherwise it won't come true." But later, when she was already in pajamas and ready to sleep, Eleanor called Anthony and Iolanda to her room. "Can I tell you my wish now?" she asked, hugging the teddy bear Pinky. "You can, Princess." "I wished for us to always be like this. Me, you and Mom, a real family." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "And I also wished for you to get married soon." Anthony and Iolanda exchanged a surprised look, but before they could answer, Eleanor continued, "I saw the ring, you know. The one you hid in your desk drawer, Dad." It was Iolanda's turn to look surprised at Anthony, who had turned red as a tomato. "Eleanor!" he exclaimed. "It was supposed to be a surprise!" The girl covered her mouth with her hands, regretful. "Oops, sorry." But the secret was already revealed. Anthony looked at Iolanda, who was watching him with a mixture of surprise and love. "Well," he said, scratching his head, "that's not how I planned to do this, but—" He got up and went to his room, returning with a small velvet box. He knelt in front of Iolanda, who remained sitting on Eleanor's bed. "I was going to wait for the perfect moment," he began, "to plan something special. But maybe there is no moment more perfect than this, here with our daughter on the day we officially became a family." He opened the box, revealing a delicate gold ring with a small diamond. "Iolanda," he continued, his voice trembling slightly, "you gave me the greatest gift anyone could receive, a family. You showed me what true love is, not only through Eleanor but through you too. Will you complete our family? Will you marry me? Tears were running down Iolanda's face. Next to her, Eleanor was practically jumping with excitement. Say yes, Mom. Say yes. Iolanda laughed through her tears. How can I say no? You two are my whole life. When Anthony slid the ring on her finger, Eleanor applauded enthusiastically. Now yes, she declared. Now we are a complete family. Later, after Eleanor finally fell asleep, not without first making 1,000 plans for the wedding, Anthony and Iolanda went to the terrace, their special place. I can't believe she found the ring, he laughed. Our daughter is very clever, replied Iolanda, admiring the ring on her finger. Our daughter, he repeated, savoring the words. How did something that seemed so unlikely become so perfect? Iolanda snuggled into his arms, looking at the stars that shone over the city. Sometimes life surprises us, she said softly. Sometimes what seems like our greatest tragedy ends up leading us to our greatest happiness. Anthony kissed her forehead. You know what surprises me most. How our apartment, which before seemed so big and empty, now seems exactly the right size for our family. Our family, she smiled. It still seems like a dream. From Eleanor's room, they heard a light murmur. She was talking in her sleep, as she sometimes did. Mommy, Daddy, I love you. Anthony and Iolanda exchanged a look full of love and gratitude. Who would have thought that a little girl, found by chance on a sidewalk, would change their lives so deeply and irreversibly? The future opened before them like a new book, with blank pages waiting to be filled with more stories, more adventures, more moments of love and joy. There would be challenges, of course. There always are, but they would face them together as a family. A family built not by blood, but by love, by destiny, by the courage of three hearts who, even wounded by life, found in each other the healing and the meaning they sought. And as the night fell softly over New York City, three hearts beat in perfect harmony in that Upper East Side penthouse. Now no longer just an apartment, but a true home. A place where love had transformed strangers into family, where pain had turned into joy, where the past had been healed by the present. A place where a little bald princess had taught a lonely man the true meaning of love, and where a strong woman had found not only safety, but also a new beginning. A place where three different stories intertwined to form one. The story of a family that chose to love each other against all odds, beyond all pain. A story of love, redemption, and second chances. A story that was just beginning.